Oftentimes, we think that no one has ever tried to stop the atrocities that happen or has happened in Africa, especially when it comes to the French. That's not true. There are people who have the courage to stand up to oppressors, and Thomas Sankara was one of those people. Obviously, I'm going to start with a bit of backstory. A lot of what I have to say may seem like insignificant exposition, but it all makes up the larger picture of his actions as president. Not only that, he accomplished a lot in a short period, and I'm going to attempt to give you a detailed Cliff Notes version. Thomas Isidore Noel Sankara was born on December 21st, 1949, to Joseph and Marguerite Sankara in Yako, French Upper Volta. He was the third of 10 children and was of Masi Fulani descent. He lived a pretty privileged lifestyle as his father was one of the few Africans employed by the colonial state of Gaoua. Thomas himself excelled in math and French and was an overall great student who took his studies very seriously. He also went to church very often as he and his family were Roman Catholic, and some of the priests actually encouraged him to go to seminary school. He agreed, but eventually he chose to go to secular school after passing the entrance exam. This information admittedly seems very small, but this one decision was a turning point that impacted the direction of his life. It also allowed him to have independence from his father. At age 17, Thomas eventually joined the military in 1966, which allowed him to pay for school. During this time, joining the military was heavily done because they had just ousted Maurice Yamiogo, who was basically a hated president. While in the military academy, he witnessed the first military coup d'etat led by Lieutenant Colonel Sangoule Lamizana. It was also here where the seeds of liberation began being planted. A civilian professor by the name of Adama Toure taught history and geography. He would also invite who he considered to be his brightest students to join discussions outside of the classroom. These conversations were about, but not limited to, imperialism, neocolonialism, socialism and communism, the Soviet and Chinese revolutions, and the liberation movement in Africa. This was the first time Sankara was exposed to revolutionary topics like this, and it changed his perspective of everything. Let's skip ahead to the 1970s. In 1970, Sankara, now 20, decided to stay in the military academy to further his education. This time, he did it in Madagascar. It was here that he learned about agriculture, how to raise crops, and better the lives of farmers. It was also here that he increased his intake of militaristic strategy and history. In 1972, he returned to Upper Volta. He eventually fought in a border war between Upper Volta and Mali. It was during this conflict that people started to take notice of him and he became very popular. Because of this, he became the commander of the Commando Training Center in Po. That year, he met Blaise Compaoré in Morocco. He and Compaoré went on to form a secret organization called ROC. This organization was all about economic development and cultural transformation of the country, national sovereignty, and rallying with other socialist and progressive countries for the sake of Third World liberation. A couple of other notable members are Henry Zongo and Jean-Baptiste Bukari Lingani. Sankara was eventually appointed Minister of Information for the military government of Saye Zerbo in September of 1981. During this time, it was clear that he wasn't like other government officials. He biked to work instead of driving. He wouldn't censor journalists and newspapers like most government officials. Instead, he encouraged them to do the work and print whatever they found in favor of the truth. This led to a lot of government scandal and exposed a lot of corruption within the government. He eventually resigned April 12, 1982, because he was not for what he called the regime's anti-labor drift. He declared, "Misfortune to those who gag the people." Bad policies and distrust between citizens and government led to another coup on November 7, 1982. This time, Jean-Baptiste O, I'm just going to say O because his name is extremely difficult, was brought to power. Sankara became the prime minister in January of 1983. He pushed for more progressive reforms, which led to his dismissal on May 17th of that same year. Shortly after this, the French president's African Affairs advisor, Guy Panay, met with Colonel Dorian Sommet, and they conspired to arrest Sankara, Henry Zongo, and Jean-Baptiste Bukari Lingani. This decision backfired against the officials, as Sankara was extremely popular amongst the locals. Sankara's imprisonment fueled another coup, this time led by his friend Blaise Compaoré. This coup led to Sankara becoming president of Volta. He was appointed on August 8, 1983, at age 33. The coup was supported by Libya, who was on the verge of war with France in Chad. Take notice of how we're starting to see the French all throughout these conflicts. I've said it once and I'll say it again. France is considered a revered country, but they would not be as powerful as they are without stealing resources from multiple African countries. That's why once they were cut off from certain African resources last year, a good portion of the country was in the dark. In fact, a lot of European countries fall in this category. They take from certain African countries and leave the people destitute. This is what Sankara wanted to stop. So, getting back to him, Sankara then got to work and promoted the Democratic and Popular Revolution. It was basically his way of defying imperialism. He wanted to fight the corruption and promote reforestation. On August 4th, 1984, the first anniversary of his presidency, he renamed the country of Volta Burkina Faso. This means the land of upright people in Moray and Dioula, the two major languages of the country. He also wrote a national anthem and revealed a new flag for the country. Again, he did a lot in a short time, so let's get into a few of his policies. He established the Council of Revolution, or the CNR. This was created for social and political change. Its members were both civilian and soldiers who came together to make decisions for the country. They helped to give advice and vote on policies, suggestions, and decisions brought forth by the government. He essentially let the ordinary people whose lives these policies would affect the most have a say. He was big into healthcare and public works. One of the first things he did was provide food, housing, and medical care to those in need. He vaccinated 2 million people from 1983 to 1985 from polio, meningitis, and measles. The infant mortality rate dropped from 20.8% to 14.5% during his presidency. They also became the first government to publicly acknowledge the AIDS epidemic was a major threat to Africa. He also created housing and infrastructure projects, built brick factories to help build those houses to put an end to urban slums. He created the People's Harvest of Forest Nurseries to help combat deforestation, supply 7,000 village nurseries, and organize the planting of several million trees. He connected the country through road systems and rail building programs completed by its citizens, thus creating jobs. He created a 5-year plan dedicated to agriculture and farming to fight the hunger crisis in the country. He also took steps to protect the environment and proposed ways to help fight the deserts and droughts. He was also an avid supporter of women's rights, saying, "There is no true social revolution without the liberation of women." He included women in his government. He and his government banned female genital mutilation, forced marriages, polygamy, and encouraged women to work outside of the home and to stay in school even if they were pregnant. Sankara also promoted contraception. He also encouraged husbands to go to market and prepare meals to experience for themselves the conditions faced by women. His educational program saw success in lowering the country's 90% illiteracy rate. He also did things like reducing the salaries of well-off government officials, sold the government's fleet of Mercedes and replaced it with the cheapest car, promoted African unity, refused to have air conditioning in his office as it was a luxury afforded to only a few at the time, fought against foreign debt by arguing that the poor and exploited should not be obligated to repay the money exploited by the rich, and the list goes on. October 15, 1987, Sankara and 12 other officials were killed in a coup led by his former colleague and friend, Blaise Compaoré. His family fled and his body was buried in an unmarked grave. His reasoning was because Sankara jeopardized foreign relations with the Ivory Coast nations and, you guessed it, the French. Once taking power, Compaoré immediately began reversing Sankara's policies and rejoined the International Monetary Fund and World Bank. His dictatorship lasted for 27 years until he was overthrown by protests in 2014. In 2017, the Burkina Faso government asked the French government to release the military documents on the assassination of Sankara. This was after Sankara's widow accused France of being behind the assassination, which, come on, of course they were. They were the only ones who would have benefited the most from this happening. Why else would Compaoré immediately rejoin the World Bank and partner back up with France? As part of President Kabore's national reconciliation policy, Compaoré and 13 others were indicted in April of 2021, 34 years after the assassination. After some delay, the trial concluded on April 6, 2022. Compaore and 2 others were sentenced to life, 8 others being sentenced to 3 to 20 years, and 3 were found innocent. Sankara set out to prove that African countries can be prosperous and okay without foreign aid and intervention. Government officials are not gods. Their entire purpose is to act in the best interest and make policies in service to the citizens that elected them. Sankara understood that and made his government officials do their jobs and act accordingly. Unfortunately, greed and jealousy robbed him of his life, his family of his presence, and his people of a good leader and prosperous country. He was everything that anyone could ask for in a leader, and it's a shame that his life was cut short. This man and his family have my utmost respect. I'm actually really sad about this because before this video, I knew of him, but I had no idea how much he cared about the people. It truly is a curse when good men shed blood and it won't go unanswered. I'm glad they're paying for their crimes. He did a lot more than what I mentioned in this video, so I encourage you to look him up. You won't be sorry. Please like, comment, subscribe. See you next video.